Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So, in this lesson, we'll be going through analysis of the poem The Little Vagabond. So, this poem envisions a world in which religious feeling and bodily pleasure are not treated as opposing forces. जैसे कि nowadays, जैसे कि इस वक्त the way all the religions they are envisioned, या फिर the way they present their faith in it, what happens that their religious understanding and faith is completely different and opposite to bodily pleasures. Okay, and somehow the pleasures of body, the pleasures of the world, they are considered to be something against the religion. Okay, but in this poem, both these are being considered the same. They're not being considered as the opposing forces. So, sitting inside a physically and emotionally cold church, a child imagines how much nicer it would be if the church were more like the ale house. Ale house क्या है? It is an inviting place offering food, drink, music, and a warm fire. यानी कि basically आजकल के pubs. Okay, so people don't need to be threatened with punishment to want to praise God, this poem suggests. And creature comforts should be seen as part of a good and virtuous life, not as sins. Creature yani ki humans, so the comforts of the humans, they should not be looked as sins. Rather, they should be considered as something good and virtuous, and these things should not lead to the punishment from the God. Okay, so if the human beings are going to be given the comforts, if they would be considered as the good and virtuous parts of the life, then it would become easier for the human beings to praise God. Okay. With this, we move on to the stanza by stanza analysis of the poem. The first stanza is dear mother, एक minute. हाँ जी. Dear mother, the church is cold, but the ale house is healthy and pleasant and warm. Besides, I can tell where I am used well. Such uses in heaven will never do well. So, a vagabond is a person who wanders from place to place without a fixed home, job, or a settled community. The Little Vagabond by William Blake is spoken in the voice of a young boy, the little vagabond, meaning a wandering or slightly mischievous child. At the start of the poem, we can imagine him sitting uncomfortably in a cold church, pulling at his mother's sleeve and saying, dear mother, the church is cold. So by repeating, Dear mother, he sounds desperate and pleading. He's very uncomfortable and wants to leave the cold church. Instead, he suggests going to the ale house, which is a kind of pub, which he describes as warm, pleasant, and welcoming. He feels happier at the pub because people at the pub treat him kindly. In contrast, he feels the church treats him harshly, so much so that he says such behavior would not be acceptable in heaven. क्या कह रहा है? Such uses, such behavior would not be in heaven, will not do well. It's not going to be acceptable in heaven. So, for readers in Blake's times, it would have been shocking to hear a child say that a pub is better than a church. However, the poem suggests that the boy might actually be right. His simple and innocent observation becomes a criticism of organized religion. It even suggests that the church itself pushes people away instead of welcoming them. The poem has four stanzas, each with four lines. These follow a rhyming pattern of double A double B. Okay, and however, the first two lines do not rhyme, which highlights the contrast between the cold church and the warm ale house. सिर्फ यही दो poems हैं which are not rhyming throughout the poem. Okay, and these are showing the contrast, how big opposing forces the ale house and the churches. That's why they're not rhyming. Okay, so the rhythm of the poem is based on having four strong beats in each line. Yani कि the regularity in the meter of this poem would be the number of beats, number of stress beats. अब they won't be present in a regular pattern, जैसे कि कोई iambic pattern हो, trochaic pattern हो. Pattern नहीं होगा, लेकिन there is regularity in the form of number of stresses. So every line would have four stresses. So in this way, this is going to be a regular meter. So the rhythm of the poem is based on having four strong beats in each line, but it does not follow a strict pattern like iambic or trochaic meter. This flexible rhythm makes the poem sound natural and conversational, like a real child speaking. It also helps show the difference in mood between the uncomfortable church and the cheerful alehouse. Dear mother, the church is cold, but the ale house is healthy and pleasant and warm. Okay, just wait a minute. Look, इसका जो बन रहा है stress pattern which is going to be like this. Okay, so dear mother, the church is cold, but the ale house is healthy and pleasant and warm. So over here it is unstressed, stress, unstressed, unstressed, stress, unstressed, unstressed, stress, and then again single unstressed and then stress. So कोई pattern तो नहीं हुआ ना? In the same way over here as well. Two unstressed is stress, two unstressed is stress, and then one unstressed stress. Again, two unstressed stress. So, but one thing is common, वो क्या है? The number of stresses. One, two, three, four. One, two, three, four. There are four stresses. So the awkward rhythms of the first line make the church sound like uncomfortable. Okay. The second line, meanwhile, uses steady NFS. Okay. जैसे कि अनस्ट्रेस स्ट्रेस. ओके अगेन अनस्ट्रेस अनस्ट्रेस स्ट्रेस. फिर सिर्फ एक जगह इट इज मिसिंग, लेकिन उसके अलावा अगेन देयर इज अनस्ट्रेस अनस्ट्रेस एंड स्ट्रेस. Okay, so da dum is the rhythm. So it's suggesting how easy and free and happy the speaker feels when he is at pub. Okay, और इधर बिल्कुल irregular है, इधर फिर भी कुछ रेगुलरिटी है. सो दिस शोज द कनेक्ट हाउ अपोजिट, हाउ डिफरेंट द लेवल ऑफ कंफर्ट इज इन चर्च एंड अपना व्हाट डू यू विद. So with this, we move on to the second stanza. But if at the church they would give us some ale and a pleasant fire, our souls to regale, we'd sing and we'd pray all the live long day, nor ever once wish from the church to stray. So in the second stanza, the child proposes a solution to church and the pub problem. If the church would only provide ale and a pleasant fire to warm and delight people's soul, he points out, then there would be no need to go to the alehouse at all. In other words, the child doesn't dislike the church because he's wicked or doesn't want to commune with God, but because church is a cold, unwelcoming place to be. If he could have both religious experience and physical comfort at the church, then he wouldn't be dreaming of other places while he's at church. Indeed, he is saying that if these creaturely needs, यानी कि human needs were met, everyone would be naturally, cheerfully pious. Listen to the parallelism over there. क्या parallelism है? We'd sing, we'd pray all the live long day. Okay, now this is parallelism. Nor ever once wish from the church to say. So that repetition with this emphasis on the word we would do this, we would do this, stresses the little vagabond's point that everyone would be made happier if the church were more like the pub. No one would turn away from religion if the church were a fun and a pleasant and welcoming place to be. These lines ask the question, why should religion be split apart from creature or human comforts? And perhaps more pointedly to all, why should the church behave as if people need to be bullied into believing when a joyous musical faith apparently comes naturally to this little vagabond? The third stanza. Then the parson might preach and drink and sing, and we'd be as happy as birds in the spring. And modest Dame Lurch, who is always at church, would not have bandy children, not fasting, not nor birds. So the little vagabond continues his dream of what the church might learn from the alehouse. In his vision, even the parson himself might preach and drink and sing right along with his congregation. Again, this might come across as an ever so slightly irreverent without a suggestion which suggests that there is no respect, by calling up images of sermon delivered through hiccups, an impression that the polysyndeton of preach and drink and sing helps to create. Okay. So, if Parson himself might preach and drink and sing, okay, na, right along with his congregation. So, this is a suggestion which is not reverent, it is irreverent. Okay, na? तो सरमन चल रहा है अब ये तो लगेगा ना दैट दिस इज डिसरिस्पेक्ट सरमन प्रीचिंग चल रही है एंड अलोंग विद द प्रीचिंग देयर इज आल्सो ड्रिंकिंग एंड सिंगिंग so this seems to be this can come across as a disrespectful image. The speaker does not think it is wrong. ये इसलिए disrespectful नहीं है because the speaker is not making fun of it. He does not think that this is wrong or sinful for the priest to enjoy himself just like everyone else. He says that if the priest and the people in the church were allowed to have a little fun, they would all be as happy as birds in the spring. This comparison shows that adding joy and energy to church would make people feel alive and cheerful, just like birds become lively and start singing when the spring arrives. Instead of just going to church out of duty, people would truly want to praise God. The speaker also says that a warmer and friendlier church would even improve people like modest Dame Lurch, who is always in church. There is some irony here because she is called modest and respectable, but she is not actually kind. Even though she is very religious, she treats her children badly. Her children are described as thin, okay, bandy children yani ke children are described as thin and weak, and she controls them by making them go hungry and by beating them with a stick yani ke birch. So the speaker suggests that simply going to church does not make someone a good person. Kindness and warmth would matter more. So the and there is internal rhyme also over here between lurch and church. This highlights the relationship between this frightful figure and the church itself, making Dame Lurch a symbol of the repressive, punishing mother church that should be nourishing and caring for its children, its congregation, but it is all the opposite. Last stanza, and God, like a father rejoicing to see his children as pleasant and happy as he, would have no more quarrel with the devil and the barrel, but kiss him and give him both drink and apparel. If the church were reformed along alehouse lines, the little vagabond concludes, everyone would be happier. Even God himself, who would like a father, only rejoice to see his children as pleasant and as happy as he. This simile draws on the Christian tradition that God is a loving father figure. If that is so, the speaker suggests then surely he would want his children to enjoy themselves. There is no reason why they can't praise him while also having a good time. At the same time, the speaker suggests that God himself is by nature a lot more pleasant than the church would suggest. He wants his children to be happy, as pleasant, and as happy as he. Rather than punishing and austere, this God is jolly, loving, and inclusive. This flies in the face of the idea inexcusably prominent in organized Christianity that God needs to be an imposing figure in order to scare people into following inflexible rules. In fact, the child is saying that if the church became friendlier and welcoming, then people would no longer need to think in strict right versus wrong way or good versus bad way. In other words, if the church were pleasant, God's children wouldn't abandon it for the alehouse, and thus the supposedly sinful and devilish pleasures inside would no longer be God's enemy. And instead, God would kiss the devil and give him both drink and apparel or clothes, suggesting that good and evil would be reconciled and human beings would feel whole. That God would clothe the devil, furthermore, suggests that no one would be standing outside the church suffering because they were deemed unworthy of divine love and guidance. Everyone would be brought into the fold, and the world would be an all round better place. The poem uses playful, humorous language to express serious ideas. Blake suggests that enjoying physical life is not opposed to spiritual life. Instead, bodily pleasure and spiritual happiness are closely connected. When organized religion tries to separate the two and treat physical pleasure as something bad, it actually creates the idea of evil itself. It also creates people like the little vagabond, restless individuals who avoid places where they are not treated kindly. The fact that the child's innocent common sense might seem shocking shows a problem with strict religious thinking. The poem is criticizing a church that is rigid, harsh, and too focused on strict rules about good and bad. With this, we move on to the themes present in this poem. The first theme is the failings of organized religion. In the poem, a child compares the cold, strict church to a warm and welcoming ale house, yani ke pub. He suggests that if the church were more cheerful and friendly like a pub, people would enjoy attending and would not want to leave. The poem criticizes organized religion, especially the Church of England, for being harsh, joyless, and focused on punishment through fasting and discipline. Instead of attracting people, it drives them away. The speaker argues that people naturally want to pray and be good, but they respond better to kindness and warmth than to strict rules and fear. In this way, the child's simple idea becomes a deeper critique of a rigid and unwelcoming church. Reconciling Good and Evil. In The Little Vagabond Bond by William Blake, the child speaker suggests that the church's real problem is not just that it is cold and strict, but that it divides the world into rigid ideas of good and evil. He imagines a world where God and the devil stop being enemies and even share a drink together. This shows that for him, good and evil are not fixed opposites but ideas that could be brought into harmony. The poem criticizes organized religion for separating spiritual life from pleasure, treating enjoyment as sinful. Instead, the speaker suggests that the church should be more like a warm, welcoming pub where joy and worship exist together. In the end, the poem argues that people do not need to choose between religion and pleasure, both can exist together, making life more complete and fulfilling. With this, we move on to the symbols that are present in the poem. The first one is warmth and cold. Shivering in church, this poem speaker longs for the pub and the warmth of its pleasant fire. It is clear that the child's desire for warmth isn't just about being physically comfortable, but about the emotional comfort that warmth symbolizes. In other words, he is longing for a humane, loving version of religion in which people sing and pray because they want to, not because they're afraid of being punished by a literary and figuratively cold, unfeeling church. Second symbol is the Dame Lurch. Dame Lurch and her birch, yani ki her stick, the stick that she uses to beat her children, symbolizes the church and its punitive attitudes. The pious but cruel Dame Lurch becomes an image of the church itself, a mean mother beating the kids she should care for. Indeed, the poem suggests that the whole reason people turn away from organized religion in the first place is because of its rigidity and cruelty. If people were instead welcomed into the church and treated well, the speaker suggests there would be no need for such punishment since it is human nature to want to connect with the divine. With this, we move on to the literary devices that are present in this poem. The first one happens to be repetition. So, the poem uses repetition to capture the little speaker's cheerful voice and his comical conviction. Take, for example, the epizeuxis in line 1. Dear mother, the church is cold. These two dear mothers come in quick succession and establish the child's urgent pleading tone. He is supremely uncomfortable in the church and really needs his mother to hear his bright idea for solving this problem, make the church more like a pub. He gives some of his reasons for this plan in lines 3 and 4 using polyptoton and epistrophe. क्या है वो? Besides, I can tell where I am used well. Such uses in heaven will never do well. Polyptoton क्या है? Used and usage. देखो एक ही version of the word, यानी कि two different versions of the same base word use का, used and usage. Okay ना? This sets up a clear contrast between the way the pub and the church use या फिर treat the boy. Epistrophe is a figure of speech in which one or more words repeat at the end of successive phrases. तो कौन से वर्ड एंड हो रहे हैं? वेल, ओके। बिगिन करते हैं तो एनाफोरा होता है, और एंड करते हैं तो क्या होगा? एपिस्ट्रोफी, ओके ना? सक्सेसिव फ्रेजेस, क्लॉजेस और सेंटेंसेस। तो हिज एपिस्ट्रोफी ऑन वेल stresses that church isn't treating anyone well at all. Rather, it is cruel and repressive in a way that the speaker can't imagine would go over well in heaven. In line 7, he pictures much more cheerful scene of the church that had learned some lessons from the pub. Here, the parallelism of we would sing, okay, and we would pray emphasizes the word we, suggesting that a more welcoming, pleasure oriented church would invite everyone and make everyone want to sing and pray as if it came naturally to them. In such a church, he goes on with cheery anaphora and polysyndeton. The parson might preach and drink and sing, and we'd be happy, we'd be as happy, and modest Daimler would not have, and God like Father rejoicing. So the momentum of that string of and shows that the speaker, caught up in his imagination, carried away from the dullness of his present circumstance toward a more joyful version of church. With this, we move on to the next literary device, which happens to be polysyndeton. Okay, alongside other forms of repetition, the poem uses polysyndeton to create a speedy rhythm that suits the child speaker. For instance, polysyndeton in line 2 evokes the speaker's enthusiasm. But the alehouse is healthy and pleasant and warm. So the extra conjunction here captures the speaker's childish excitement as he describes a place where he always feels warm and welcome. In line 9, then the parson might preach and drink and sing. Again, the extra and makes it sound as if the speaker is getting carried away with glee as he imagines how much more enjoyable church could be. Next literary device is juxtaposition. Throughout the poem juxtaposes the cold church with the healthy and pleasant and warm alehouse, suggesting that organized religion foolishly and needlessly splits itself off from the joy of being alive. If the church were as warm and welcoming as the alehouse, he suggests it would be the better of the two options, offering not just a toasty fire and tasty ale, but the innate pleasure of prayer and song. But to the church, the alehouse is an opposite and an enemy. Just as God is opposed to the devil, the church and the pub can never meet. Church is for piety, the pub is for sinful pleasure. The next is simile. The poem uses similes to help illustrate how much better the speaker feels church would be if it were a bit more like a pub. In line 10, the speaker says that if the church included drinking and singing in addition to preaching, then the congregation would be as happy as birds in the spring. This simile suggests the thawing of the emotional coldness of the church. Birds greet spring happily because it means the end of a harsh winter. In lines 13 and 14, the speaker compares God to a father rejoicing to see his children as pleasant and as happy as he. But presenting God as father who is thrilled to see his children happy, the poem challenges the need for a strict, uncompromising, and miserable church and a strict, uncompromising, miserable vision of God. With this, we move on to the form, meter, and rhyme scheme present in this poem. सही है जी. So let us first talk about the form. This poem is made up of four quatrains written in accentual meter, यानी कि lines measured not in regular feet like the iamb or the trochee, but by a certain number of beats, which are four in this case. Each stanza can be further broken down into two couplets based on the poem's double A double B rhyme scheme. This simple nursery rhyme shape is a good fit for a poem spoken by a sweet little boy. By presenting the boy's apparently irreverent ideas in this cheerful, playful form, Blake emphasizes this little vagabond's basic innocence. The poem is written in accentual meter. That means that the lines use a regular. अब हम आ गए meter पे. So the poem is written in accentual meter. That means that the lines use a regular number of beats, which are four in this case, without sticking to any one kind of metrical foot like the iamb or the trochee. For example, listen to the changing rhythms of the first two lines. Dear mother, the church is cold, but the alehouse is healthy and pleasant and warm. The heavy rhythm of line one stresses the speaker's discomfort. The line lands hard on the word cold. In contrast, the second line uses anapes, some anapes, giving a jollier, easier rhythm to the boy's visions of the cozy ale house. ओके ऑल ऑफ देम आर एनएफएस सॉरी पिछले मैंने बोला था कि ऑल ऑफ देम आर नॉट एनएफएस लेकिन इधर वाई हेल ये वाई एंड एन आर अनस्ट्रेस पहले मैं ये मिस कर रहा था ओके सो ऑल ऑफ देम इन द सेकंड लाइन आर एनएफएस लेकिन बाकी तो एनएफएस नहीं है ना तो बाकी में भी क्या होगा सिर्फ और सिर्फ फोर बीट्स होंगी with this, we move on to the rhyme scheme. For the most part, the poem follows double A double B rhyme scheme that divides each stanza into two couplets. This pattern evokes the innocent, childish voice of the little vagabond and helps to make the poem's mischievous point. Even a little kid can see that the church lacks the attractions the alehouse offers. A bouncy internal line in line 11 in the form of modest Dame Lurch, who is always at church, similarly captures the child's alert, funny voice. The only place the poem diverges from this pattern is the first two lines. Dear mother, the church is cold, but the alehouse is healthy and pleasant and warm. The absence of rhyme at the beginning of an otherwise strictly rhymed poem reflects exactly what these lines describe. The way that organized religion has split off and rejected the warmth of ordinary human comforts. देख लें आप आखिरी words भी देख लें difference किसका है cold and warm church is cold and the ale house is warm okay with this we end the analysis I hope you understood it if you've got any questions please feel free to ask